Okay, it is 5 after, so I am going to get started. Welcome everyone uh, to our day 2 of Degrees of Success. We're going to start today first by doing a land acknowledgement. So we would like to begin by acknowledging the land on which we gather and on which the region of Peel operates. This is part of the treaty lands and the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. For thousands of years, indigenous peoples have inhabited and cared for this land. In particular, we acknowledge the territory of the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Ojibwe-Chippewa peoples, and the land that is home to the Métis, and most recently, the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, who are direct descendants of the Mississaugas of the Credit. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land, and by doing so, give our respect to its first inhabitants. We should continue as settlers living in this land with First Nations and Métis communities to continue stewardship over the land, the water, and the environment as a whole. I'm sure that the pandemic has really brought it home for many of us how important the land and water is. We are missing our parks, and we're being asked to frequently wash our hands to maintain good hygiene. And a recognition of how fortunate we are to have this water at our disposal. But also recognition that with this disposability comes responsibility. Like the Mississaugas and the allied nations, who have been and still do take care of these waters, we too owe the water the same. We are sustained by clean water, and so let us sustain it as well. Additionally, we are joined by many people today from across Canada and globally. We wish to acknowledge the global pan-Indigenous communities on whose territories our international attendees are. We hope our attendees take this opportunity to reflect on their own connection to their respective lands, and also on the Indigenous communities with whom they share the land with. As we speak about land, water, and environment, it is a really good segue or transition into talking about our keynote speaker. Our keynote speaker, Dr. Ananya Banerjee, is an assistant professor in the divisions of Social and Behavior Health Sciences and Epidemiology at the Dalla Lana School of Public Health, University of Toronto. She's also the interim program director of the MPH Health Promotion Program. Her public health research on diabetes prevention for South Asian communities exemplifies a commitment to providing a strong foundation in mixed methods guided by principles of socio-ecological framework, anti-oppression, intersectionality, community partnerships, and cultural safety. She launched and offers the first course on race, ethnicity, and culture and health for graduate students at the University of Toronto. She is also trained in Indian classical music and loves traveling rural areas of the world. Welcome, Ananya. We are so happy to have you here today. And we're really looking forward to you giving us a little bit of this background on what epidemiology is, and especially talking about the South Asian context and diabetes.
Thanks so much, Rupali. And I just wanted to commend, and I really admire your leadership in bringing Lotus STEM to the forefront to really inspire young South Asian women to have more impact than we are right now. And I really wish I had a program like this when I was growing up and in university. So thank you. It's my pleasure to be here today and to be chosen as the keynote speaker for this conference. I'm super excited to have the opportunity to interact with all of you today. I'm going to be talking about epidemiology and how it's the backbone of South Asian health in Ontario in Canada. So, as you probably did give a land acknowledgement, I do want to say I'm very grateful as a settler and as a child of immigrant parents who are from Kolkata, India, for giving me the opportunity to be on this land that is rightfully for Indigenous communities for thousands of years and today. And as an educator at the University of Toronto, I am fully committed to working alongside my Indigenous students, my colleagues, and communities to ensure that we fight with them to affirm their inherent rights. So, what is public health? And so I think all of you, because of the pandemic, should have a good idea of what public health is. But in a nutshell, it's about improving the health of populations, it's making humans healthy, it's about definitely saving lives. And here's a fun fact. So in Canada, from 1960 to 2017, the life expectancy, i.e., how long people are living now, has gone up by almost 12 years. That's really huge. And so when we think about, wow, what is increasing, the years that we're living on this earth, it's because of public health programs. And so when we're thinking about what are the public health programs that are enabling us to live longer, it's really like having clean water projects to disease prevention, to environmental cleanup, and to education initiatives. And so, how does epidemiology play a strong role in public health? Well, it is essentially the backbone of public health, and I'll be able to have the opportunity to walk through a real live example of how epidemiology helps to inform public health programs, particularly for South Asian communities. When we think about epidemiology, it's about focusing on frequency and patterns of health related states and specific populations. So, every day you're hearing, the rates of COVID have gone up, it's going down. What are the number of deaths? That in itself is epidemiology. Also, when we're hearing these trends, we want to be able to understand, why are diseases such as, for example, diabetes, the coronavirus, and also vector diseases such as malaria, what are driving the rates to be high and low? And so epidemiology also helps us to really unpack in what we call the determinants. They could be also factors that influence death and disease. And when we're thinking about different determinants, it's often tied down to our genetics. It comes down to, economic stability. We know that poor people or like people living in poor neighborhoods are at higher risk for various diseases and death. It's also having access to education opportunities. And it's also about employment, right? Ensuring that communities who experience high rates of, not being employed or being on contract work, we know that their health is often compromised. It's also about health behaviors. So, having access to fresh fruits and vegetables, having opportunities to engage in exercising, and having the time to do so. It's also about the neighborhoods that we're living in. And I think more and more you are seeing in the media, for example, there are certain neighborhoods who are experiencing higher rates of COVID compared to other neighborhoods. And they're often tied down to determinants such as, people having different income levels, educational opportunities, and employment. And lastly, it's about access to healthcare systems. So, even though we're fortunate to be in Canada and we do have a universal healthcare system, but epidemiology, what it really shows often is that all neighborhoods are not actually equal when it comes to having, opportunities to good health care. So when we think about the best hospitals and where they're located, particularly in the GTA, they're in the downtown core. So something to think about. All in all, when we're trying to really unpack, all these diseases, if they're going up or down, and trying to understand, the reasons behind it, it really helps to be able to take these findings and then create programs and policies to promote health in those areas. And again, a great example is COVID. So as we saw that the rates were at one point just climbing, climbing, climbing. We were in like serious lockdown, and then as soon as we started to see rates going down, you can see the restrictions were also going down too. And so this is the importance of epidemiology. And so what do I do? So epidemiology is a huge field, and there's thousands of us doing a lot of different things. And so what I specifically do is I look at type 2 diabetes. Why? Because diabetes is actually a big public health issue. As you know, in 2017, 7.3% of Canadians aged 12 and under, that includes many of you who are in the audience, reported being diagnosed with diabetes. And given it's 2020, I'm pretty sure that there are more than 2.3 million people who have diabetes in Canada right now. And so, what I'm really interested is what are the rates of diabetes for immigrant communities, particularly for those who come from South Asia, such as India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Nepal, and when they come to Canada, how are the rates of diabetes? And so, based on that, as an epidemiologist, these are the questions that I'm constantly thinking about. What are the patterns of diabetes among South Asian immigrants living in Ontario? What specific immigrant communities from South Asia and Ontario are at the greatest risk for diabetes? What are the factors or the determinants, as I talked about, that make South Asians in Ontario have diabetes? And then lastly, what type of prevention programs can we create for South Asians in Ontario at risk? And so, all in all, I'm going to be now having the opportunity to engage with all of you. And, these are questions that we ask in epidemiology when we're collecting data. So, I would love for all of you to log on to menti.com. And in the audience, I want you to tell me how many of you have a family member who has diabetes right now.
Ananya, we need a code to
Oh,
move
and the
the
code is 791654. 791654. And the code is actually right up here. If you haven't put in the code yet, 791654. I'll give you a few more seconds to participate. Okay, so as we can see, even though people are still participating, we can confidently say a majority of you who are in the audience has a member who has diabetes. So I'm going to go back to my presentation and show you some of the work that I've done. So as an epidemiologist trying to understand diabetes in the South Asian community, I actually had the chance to look at all immigrants in Ontario and actually characterize them according to whether they're a non-immigrant, if they're South Asian. But then among the South Asians, I was also able to look at immigrants who specifically came from India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Nepal. And what you can see here, as you can see where the stars are, the rate of diabetes in South Asians is definitely much higher than non-South Asian immigrant communities. But what we really need to be careful is that we can't say that all South Asians have the same type of risk. And the risk actually is different based on where you came from. And as you can see here, immigrants who came from Sri Lanka actually have the highest risk of diabetes. So why are these findings important? So this enables us to really start to think and focus on the next question is, what are some of the reasons why South Asians have higher rates of diabetes? So again, I would love for you to go back to menti.com. And I want to hear from you what you think are some of the top reasons why South Asians are getting diabetes. So the code for menti.com is 7039 And essentially, these are the questions that we ask as epidemiologists to our population that we are studying. So you're actually doing a mini epidemiology study with me right now. So the code is 703938. And so essentially, as people begin to participate, we're creating a word cloud.
So by the way, we can't actually see the word cloud. We only see the presentation.
Oh, you can't? Can you see the word cloud now? Can you see the word cloud now?
No, it's still the presentation. You may have to actually stop sharing and select that screen to share.
Okay. So you can't, okay. You still can't see it?
No.
Okay. I will stop sharing. I apologize, technology. Okay. How can you see it now?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so as everyone's participating, we're creating a word cloud. So essentially in this word cloud, the largest word is the most common reason why all of us are identifying as why South Asians have high rates of diabetes. So I can see here that majority of everyone in the audience really feels it's the lack of exercise, followed by probably eating habits and our genetics that are causing the high rates of diabetes. And then there's other important factors that other people have identified, such as poverty, absolutely, the environments that we live in, having access to education, and also our lifestyles. And so coming back, I'm going to come out of this. I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint. And I apologize for this. Okay, you can see my slides again?
Yep.
Okay. So now that we have identified some of the reasons for diabetes, so the question is, through the work that we're doing in epidemiology, just as many of you have identified what the risk factors are, the reality is we're actually still trying to figure it out. And we're not dismissing, yes, I think exercise and diet, particularly the patterns of it within the South Asian communities, definitely do play a role in our risk for diabetes, as well as having a genetic history. And the reality is that often we as a South Asian community we do blame ourselves because of our genetics, behaviors, and culture, just like many of you identified. But what's something really important to think about, and work that is starting to be done now, is how do the social determinants, for example, the socioeconomic factors, actually attribute to the risk of diabetes in South Asian communities. And this is something that we're actually not studying readily, and we need to really try to understand it. Because, a study, for example, that was done at Harvard, they actually showed a person who is, healthy, the main reasons that they're healthy, attributes to their socioeconomic factors, such as having access to education, being employed, having a strong family and network, along with living in their environment and having to access care. So when we think about health behaviors such as exercise and diet, only 30% of these behaviors explains why people are healthy or explains why they don't have diabetes. So there's other factors that we have to consider, and that's something that I'm trying to understand right now. However, we need many of you to do this work as well, because we can't do it alone. So I'm hoping that many of you will be working in public health research as epidemiologists to help us understand why South Asians are at such high risk for diabetes. So we do have another interactive moment, but because this portion is not working well, I'm actually going to skip through it. But what I really wanted to showcase is that I imagine if I were to have you all answer that question, is that many of you may have probably say that you feel that your risk for diabetes is high. So whenever I do ask this question to anyone, no matter what their age is, and if they haven't gotten diabetes and they're South Asian, they will likely say that they have a moderate to high chance risk. So when I talk about moderate, it's about 6% to 15%, but when you have a high chance, it's like 20%. And so, given the fact that many of us, including me, who has a father who had diabetes and my mother who's pre diabetic, I am so scared I'm going to get diabetes in the next 5 to 10 years. We need to break the cycle. And also, epidemiology is starting to show that South Asians are getting diabetes at much younger ages compared to the Caucasian population. And so, given that we have this cycle where, diabetes is so prevalent in our families, so if our parents had it or if our grandparents had it, the likelihood of us getting it is pretty high. And so, if South Asians have the highest rates of type 2 diabetes in Canada, well, their children is also at increased risk. And therefore, we need more prevention programs and we need to start young. Because we know, because as a community, as we identified here, if we feel that exercise and diet, is influencing our high risk, well, we really need to start making sure that we are starting at an early age among South Asian communities where they're practicing in their behaviors. But at the same time, we need to start educating our young South Asian people and ensure they're not blaming themselves and their ways of being having diabetes and trying to understand more of the social determinants. And so hopefully many of you will be working in public health as health promoters to bring the rates of diabetes down in our communities. So I am an epidemiologist, but I'm also a health promoter. And so a lot of the work that I do in epidemiology helps me to also think of novel, innovative ways to deliver diabetes prevention programs. And so in the last 3 years, we launched the South Asian Adolescent Diabetes Awareness Program in the Peel region. And this program actually was noticed quite a bit by the media, and there has been a lot of impact. And so I'm going to actually end my presentation showing you a video of this program and how it was run in the Brampton area. Can you see the video? Rupali?
No.
Okay, no.
We can hear it.
Okay. This is a health promotion program. Okay. I'm so sorry, everyone.
It's just technology.
Okay. Now, can you see? Okay, not yet.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. All right, so I'm going to end up showing this video.
But it's not simply a health education program. We're not simply just asking or teaching the youth how to exercise and eat properly. We know those are important components to help reduce their risk of diabetes, but we have a whole social advocacy piece that is part of this program. What we're trying to do is understand and explore what we call the social determinants of health, really acknowledging that there's a huge variety of factors that impact the health and quality of life of our participants. So we're having conversations about food insecurity, food access, body image, the built environment in the neighborhoods that our participants live in, the school environment where they spend so much of their time. So it's really important for us to look at diabetes prevention holistically like that. So that we can take a multi-level approach and hopefully help these youth make lasting changes throughout their lives.
So the program includes meetings with dietitians to learn more about diet, also kinesiologists or exercise specialists, coaches, so that people can the kids can adopt a better lifestyle that will hopefully be there throughout their life and help them achieve their health goals.
The science is pretty clear that exercise is a big part in preventing diabetes. So my role as a kinesiologist for SATAP is to lead the exercise component, but to make sure that it's fun and engaging for our participants.
So the goal of the exercise program with SATAP is to make what is commonly perceived as a challenging activity an engaging and fun and highly achievable activity. So looking at ways of trying to tap into each individual's potential, looking at what they enjoy and how to translate that into a regular routine and a regular activity that they can always strive to do without even thinking about it.
Through the SATAP study, we're hoping to build healthy eating patterns and lifestyles so that the youth participants can incorporate these early on in their life.
Package. Have you guys ever looked at the label?
Yes.
We're using a hands-on approach for our nutrition education through grocery store tours, food demos, and activities so that our youth participants are engaged throughout the program.
You definitely learn a lot more than you really think you know when it comes to diabetes and managing it. So it's a program that it should definitely be taken advantage of because you don't get an opportunity like this every day. So like this is a person's opportunity to actually make some change in their life.
So back to my share screen. So I think
I put these balls in my toy. I didn't make it big. Like this.
okay. So that is a nutshell of what I do as a public health scientist in diabetes prevention. Again, I just wanted to thank my parents because I wouldn't be here where I am today. Who you see on the left side at my master's graduation ceremony. And I have to also thank my students. So another big part of my life is being a professor and teaching courses on public health. And my students are my life. And the picture that we have is from graduation last year at the same spot where I took the picture with my parents. So I'm just really grateful to them. And lastly, very grateful to my entire research team. The South Asian Adolescent Diabetes Awareness Program would not have been so successful without them. So thank you.
Thank you, Ananya. I have a few questions for you. I think you gave a very interesting and it's a topic that many of us have heard about. We all have heard enough about diabetes, and we know that South Asians are prone to diabetes, but why that is the case is something that many of us don't know, and we've kind of gotten to a point where we're a little bit more. I guess we don't think about it on an active basis as much. But my first question to you is, did you always know you wanted to be an epidemiologist?
No, growing up, if anybody asked me what I wanted to be, so I either wanted to be a teacher, and I think that has been fulfilled by being a professor. I wanted to be a physiotherapist or a doctor. And who doesn't want to be a doctor? We all do at some point. When we're born crying, we're like, okay, I want to be a doctor. And our parents are looking at us saying, oh, our future doctor. So, I mean, no, I didn't. I had no idea what epidemiology was until, when I took a course in it in my fourth year in undergrad. And even at that point, I didn't know I wanted to be an epidemiologist. I did my PhD in epidemiology, and that's when I became an epidemiologist. Yeah.
So how did you decide to do a PhD in it?
So I did my master's in qualitative research. So when you do epidemiology, it's numbers, but then often when you go to communities and you want to hear about their stories, you want to help them, talk about why they are experiencing high rates of diabetes. Actually, that was my master's thesis project. I talked to the communities, and so I thought I was going to be a South Asian researcher, and then and I actually didn't think of going towards doing a PhD. Reason being, I'm a kinesiologist. So I actually worked at Women's College Hospital for 10 years, teaching women with heart disease how to exercise.
Oh gosh.
So there was a talk at Women's College Hospital that I went to, and there was a really renowned professor, Sania Anand, who's at McMaster, and she is actually one of the very first people in Canada who showed South Asians are at higher risk for diabetes. And so, of course, I went to go see her talk because her work is what inspired my master's thesis, is to go talk to South Asians and ask them why they have heart disease and diabetes. And so when I saw her talk, I was so excited. And then I went up to her and I just said hello, and I said, thank you for just doing all your work. It really inspired me to do my master's. And then she said, I would love to continue this conversation. And she invited me for a meeting at McMaster. And then she offered me to do a PhD in epidemiology. And she said, if I was going to continue this work, I had the qualitative background, but it was important. I look at the epidemiology behind South Asians who have diabetes. And that's when it happened. And my parents were like, you have to go if you're getting the opportunity to do a PhD.
So I'm hearing that you had a lot of support. And you had a lot of support, not just from your parents, but also from someone that you looked up to. And you just went and you had a conversation that led to a whole kind of new arm to your career. So how was that transition, going from working for 10 years as a kinesiologist, and then all of a sudden you decided you're going to go back to school, you're going to do a PhD in a topic that is not necessarily the same, but maybe related in that you were working within the community. So how was that transition?
It was tough. I think something I do want to just kind of showcase to everyone here is don't be afraid to go up to people who you may think may not want to talk to you because they're so big, because you just never know, who believes in you and who believes in your work. And so, yes, if I didn't go up to Sonia, and trust me, I was debating whether she would even want to talk to me that night. And then I just went and I did it. And so from that, I think what was really nice is I was excited because, 10 years ago, the work on South Asians and diabetes was still not as fast as it is becoming now. And so for me, because I'm part of the community, and also that year my dad got diagnosed with diabetes, it was just, serendipitous. And I think my experience working with patients as well really kind of forced me, particularly our South Asian patients, to do more and to study more. And so it was a bit of a transition, but it was very rewarding. And I learned so much, and I was scared. I liked math, but I also was happy I never had to take another course in calculus or anything again in my life. And so to go back and have to take all these courses in statistics again was daunting. But I realized also, if we want to make changes at the policy level, we need the numbers, right? And I think that was my driving force. And it was challenging, but I think, during those 5 years I was a McMaster, I, really networked. I really talked to a lot of people. And, as a team, including my supervisors, we really tried to understand a lot of the inequities that do exist. So my PhD wasn't on South Asians at the end. Because that's your PhD. And the reason we decided not to do that is we decided to take a different angle. So I looked at health promotion programs in places of worship. which was also a stepping stone for another, like a part of my research, because I do work like on creating exercise programs in, mosques and temples and gurudwaras.
That's actually really interesting that, your program, your current program right now, it's not just teaching adolescents on how to exercise and, breaking that cycle, but you're also taking it into religious houses and having it kind of instilled into our lifestyle, not just at a young age, but also for those that are older. Um, how do you find that? Do you find that you are getting a lot of receptiveness from some of our older, like the elders in our community? Sometimes I know that I've had this where sometimes you try and tell them something and you get it like, no, no, you don't know my health and you don't know how difficult it is. How do you deal with that then?
I mean, it's different for every, I think, community. I think what we have to also understand, the South Asian community is so heterogeneous. It's so different. It's so vast, right? Depending where you're from, based on your religion, your culture, where you're living in like the GTA. And so, I think my first opportunity to work with older South Asians was right after I finished my PhD. So even throughout my PhD, I still continued to work as a kinesiologist at Women's College Hospital. And I used to notice that a lot of our Muslim female South Asian patients, they had talked about a lot of barriers that they experience exercising. And, it was interesting. They wouldn't say it was because of their culture, or it's because being a woman. A lot of them said that they didn't feel comfortable exercising in public in fear of Islamophobia. That's when the riots began, right? And particularly for a lot of older Muslim women, who wear a hijab, they were just fearful to go to any community center, to join any spaces, and like I said, public spaces. And it was through my work with them, they were so successful coming to our program at Women's College, but it was so hard to see how they can continue after they leave our program. And it was one of our patients who had suggested, could we not do it at the mosque? That is a safe space. There's a space for only women. And so then we partnered with a mosque in downtown. They were also part of a diabetes screening program, and they found that the women were at high risk for diabetes. It was Medina Mosque downtown. And so then they partnered with us at Women's College. We got research funding, we evaluated it, and then we brought the exercise program to the mosque. This was 6 years ago, and they were it was one of the greatest partnerships I ever had. It really showed solidarity working within the South Asian community, especially for me as a Hindu South Asian person. It was so amazing to be part of this mosque, to be able to create so much change for the mosque. And the program in the first 3 years was led by kinesiologists, because they were very adamant to have exercise professionals. And then now it's still running at Medina Mosque, and the women themselves are running the exercise program. And the program enabled them to become so confident in themselves. Now the women are now joining public spaces and community centers to exercise. That's a whole other project.
Oh my gosh. Like you've worked with women who had heart disease, you've worked with South Asians and like trying to understand the determinants of diabetes among South Asians. And now you're telling me that not only are you teaching adolescents, you've gone to religious spaces, you've allowed for, or not allowed, but you've created an environment where there's a lot of women empowerment, where women themselves feel confident to take on, no wonder you're our keynote.
I'm where I am today without my team, in all honesty.
So I'll ask one last question before I open up the floor to our participants' questions. How do you define success, and how do you find, or how's your identity as a South Asian woman affected how you define success?
It's a really great question. I mean, something I really need to reflect on. But I think My success, I really define it by the opportunities that I have given to young women in the South Asian communities. So, a lot of these projects that I've talked about, they have been successful because I've had such hard-working South Asian master's students, right? Who, tell me that they never thought it would be possible to come into a public health school and be able to do work for their community, and to have someone also like me be able to, like, show them that it is possible for us to create change, especially as a racialized community. um, you know Unfortunately, the systems we live in is not always supporting us, and until we get to the point where systems are supporting us, as a community, we need to band together in solidarity, and start to create and solve a lot of the problems we're facing. And so, I think for me, when I have, funding, and I am able to employ my MPH students and to be part of these projects, take a lead on it, that for me is success more than anything. And like I said, I wish I had these opportunities, 10, 15 years ago. I wish I had a South Asian female professor who was doing work for my community, and I didn't, right? And so I think that's been something that I will cherish for the rest of my life, and nothing, like, no publication will ever be, having to work with the next generation, and to really just, dismantle all those inequities that we're facing as a community.
I can't agree with you more. That it's kind of why LotusStem also exists, was seeing the lack of that visibility and mentorship that many of us were looking for.
Mhm.
And now we're in a position where we can provide that. So many of us are just trying to do the same. We have some questions in the chat, if you're okay to answer them. The first question is from Jovita, and she asks, are you looking to expand the youth program to the rest of GTA?
I wish. So these programs take a lot of funding and money. Unfortunately, we finished the pilot program, so we had 80 youth who accessed our program, and it was really successful. And I'll be honest, like, I think one of the biggest challenges of being a public health scientist is to continue the work that you're doing, particularly interventions. Like, Canada's known for having a lot of different pilot programs because there's money for pilots, but unfortunately there's not a lot of money to sustain your pilot programs. And that's one of the biggest challenges I have been facing. And because of COVID right now, any funding opportunities that are out there to scale the program is dismal. And I think I have to be patient. I'm also just at this stage, just trying to promote this work, working with a lot of different policymakers, showing them we need more programs like this. So fingers crossed, in the next couple of years, we can definitely scale this program up. But it takes time. And because of the funding climate, I don't see anywhere in the near future it scaling up.
That's always the hope, is that we create these programs and hope that we'd be able to spread, but it's always difficult with funds, and money is needed in many places.
Yeah, definitely.
Vidya asks, how could we aim to raise awareness among South Asians about diabetes?
So that's a good question. I think, there is a lot of awareness programs out there. So the work that I'm doing is I'm not the only one. If you Google South Asian education programs in Toronto, you'll come across many. I think what's important is that all of us who are doing this work need to band together and to really create, a very, sustainable model for these type of programs. Also evaluation, trying to see what programs have worked successfully and what haven't. And so I think a big part of The awareness piece for me, just doing this work for so many years, I'm starting to find our youth have a very strong platform. And so actually, a lot of the youth in the South Asian Adolescent Diabetes Awareness Program didn't actually change their life, they changed their families' lives. Even the parents who had diabetes had said the information that their children had brought to them, they didn't get through their education program. So that shows there's a gap, right? And I think there's an opportunity for youth to come together and to really start to be vocal about diabetes and other issues that, as South Asians, we are facing more than other communities, and really start to look towards how do we advocate for more resources? How do we advocate for policies to make sure they're including us? And so a lot of the youth who are part of the South Asian Adolescent Diabetes Awareness Program have actually come together. They formed a youth council, and they're going to be holding a virtual exhibit in September. And I will share the information with Rupali so she could send it with all of you. So we've created a documentary of South Asian youth in Brampton sharing their stories and struggles of them being at risk for diabetes and their families, and showcasing the Peel region environment and how it's conducive to having diabetes. And so that's going to be our first platform to bring awareness at the population level for South Asians in Ontario. And so that's some of the creative ways that we're trying to do. But like I said, I think many of you are here, there's so much work for you to delve into, right? We can't do this alone. And so I would love to hear your ideas, and I will definitely send an invitation to our event in September.
Yes, please. And when you do, I will make sure that it goes out to everyone who
Thank
has
you.
signed up for our conference as well, because I think it's important, not only educational, but also to help spread the word. And as you said, band together, because that's how we would start to make some policy changes.
Absolutely.
We have a question from Bianca and Daniela. They ask, what is the favorite part of your job, and how has your job been affected because of COVID-19?
That's a great question. So my favorite part, I think I said before, is the students and giving them opportunities and to be part of my research team. That's absolutely my favorite part. Also, another favorite part is that I work with South Asian communities very closely. So they help to inform a lot of the research that I'm doing. They help us guide the process. And so, going in there often in my work, I'm not going in as a South Asian public health scientist. I'm not going in as a professor. I'm actually going in as, a pseudo daughter to, a lot of the older South Asians, as an older sister to a lot of the younger South Asians who are on my project. And I think, as a community, we are very collectivist. And I think that part I have been able to embed in my research and to really create a pretty good equal playing field, right? And to be able to work together and to be able to solve a lot of these issues that we are facing in terms of diabetes risk. That's definitely one of my favorite parts, and just to be able to work with so many different people. COVID-19, it's been challenging, but I'm also very grateful that all the work that I'm doing, actually, I can do it from home and remotely. The research that I'm doing is still continuing. The research at this point, we're not doing any interventions. And so we're okay right now. But I think COVID-19 is also making me think, for example, how do we create the South Asian Adolescent Diabetes Awareness Program to be virtual and be a virtual platform, right? Also thinking, how do we get the youth who are part of the South Asian Adolescent Diabetes Awareness Program and to be able to create a peer model for them to actually lead the education sessions and not having to rely on, professionals all the time. So I think COVID-19 has actually given me the opportunity to think outside the box, right? And understanding we can't not stop education programs, right? And how do we able to really bring them in, virtually so they actually can be more accessible and more engaging. And so there has been a bit of a silver lining of COVID-19, but I do miss being face to face with the communities and my research team and giving them hugs and celebrating. And that's the one part I really miss. Yeah.
I think a lot of us are missing that in-person conversations. So we have only about 6 minutes left. So I'm going to ask one final question, and hopefully it'll be a small question. It's not, but have you ever faced any obstacles while becoming an epidemiologist?
Definitely. And I don't want to end off on on like me talking about my struggles. Like I think, for me to share my story, it hasn't been very, a streamlined process where, I did my PhD, I did my postdoc, I'm a U of T, I'm a professor, I get money. It hasn't been. There's been a lot of dips in between. I think one of the biggest challenges, as an epidemiologist is being a South Asian female, a young South Asian female. And, given that we know, like in COVID-19, it's really showcased, racism is a big issue in Canada. We can't deny it. And, when you look at the university landscape, when you look at the research landscape, like I want you to think about how many young South Asian female professors have you had, right? Like you can probably count it. I've had one, and it was in South Asian studies. I had to go to South Asian studies to get us to be taught by a South Asian researcher, right? And so, that is the biggest struggle. And often, your work is discredited. You still don't get the same opportunities as you want. And sometimes I wonder when my funding applications are going in, is there bias when they see my first and last name, right? Do they take me seriously when I'm presenting my work because I'm young and I'm a person of color? And I think, not to say there's a lot of epidemiologists out there, South Asian female epidemiologists, particularly in Toronto. We are working our way up, but it takes us longer to get to our goals than our, white male and white female epidemiologist colleagues. And I'm not afraid to say it. I think, if you want to enter academia, you have to be prepared to work hard. You have to be prepared to not give up. And, and not let, institutions that are primarily dominantly still white today to not make you feel any less, or and you really need to fight, and that's absolutely key. Like, you can't, and like people are going to push you down along the way, and it's really important that you get up, and that's why it's really important to have mentors, right, who believe in you. And a lot of my mentors were not just South Asian, like they were all backgrounds, but they believed in me. And so when I did fall, they helped me get up, and they, motivated me to keep pushing forward. And so I would say that's the biggest challenge right now, just to be a person of color, to be a woman, is, and I'm sure Rupali can totally attest to this. Like, we have to work twice as hard, and you have to be ready to work twice as hard.
I think it's a great message overall to our participants as well. Like, we have parents and we have youth here, and as much as there is yes, we need to work hard, it's also being aware that these are issues. And so having your support system at home and your support system at work, in terms of mentors, in terms of your colleagues and your friends. All of your schoolmates are your colleagues, and they support you in components that you want to do as well. So making sure that you have that. I think the other great message that you sent was, don't be afraid to take risks and go up and talk to someone you admire. They're only human. Just, they put on their pants one leg at a time, as the saying goes. So in the same way, I think those are some really good messages to leave our participants with. I'm aware that there's only 2 minutes left. I would like to start the poll for our participants to give us some feedback on today's talks. And thank you, Ananya, for giving us such a good introduction to what public health is, what you do as an epidemiologist, and also the changing of fields, going from being a kinesiologist into an epidemiologist. It was just fascinating. And I'm sure that everyone really appreciated the information that they got today.
Oh yeah, no worries. Yeah, if anyone, feel free. You can find me on Google, my email address, and if you have any questions, I'm always here to provide any form of mentorship or advice.
Thank you. And so before everyone leaves, please do reply to the poll. It gives us feedback, like so that we know whether or not we're providing information that you are interested in and how else we can improve. And then also a reminder that we have day 3 of the conference tomorrow. So for our youth, we have our outreach with Mining Matters. And we're going to learn a lot about geology and rocks. And in the session after that at 5 p.m., we're going to have a workshop talking about equity in STEM. And what does that actually mean? And how can we be supportive of it? And if you have done the poll, thank you so much. You're welcome to stay back and ask any more questions if you have some time, Ananya, but that's essentially the end of our formal part.
Yeah, I'm happy to stick around for a few minutes.